But what if NATO decides to stop playing the proxy game and directly entering the war on behalf of Ukraine? Can Russia alone militarily compete with an organization that is represented by 30 odd countries? Soviet Union and America never had a direct military confrontation. Hey guys, this is Prashant and we have a very special video. And this time, this video is about Russia and NATO. What will happen if NATO enters into the ongoing military conflict between Russia and Ukraine?
Сегодня мы слышим, что нас хотят победить на поле боя. Ну, что здесь скажешь? Пусть попробуют.
As an economic war on Russia, which is now the most sanctioned country in the world.
Well, as we all know, Russia attacked Ukraine in January this year, and since then both countries have been involved in a bloody military conflict. Ukraine, owing to its small size and inferior military strength, obviously cannot really match up with the military might of the Russian Red Army. But despite this fact, Ukraine has shown extraordinary resistance against the powerful Russians. Due to this unexpected resistance, Russia has managed to capture only 15% of Ukraine's total territory after 9 months of long military confrontation. Well, this means that Ukraine are still in control of 85% of its territory. Now the question is, how did a small country like Ukraine manage to withstand the might of one of the most powerful militaries in the world? Well, the answer is NATO. Well, NATO has been providing military equipments and financial support to Ukraine ever since the war broke out.
Been proved completely wrong. He's getting more NATO. This is a historic summit in many ways.
I think it's a history-making summit.
NATO is obviously fighting a proxy war here. But why is it really fighting a proxy war and not a direct war? Well, this is because Ukraine is still not a member of the NATO. And since Ukraine is still not a member, NATO is not obliged to send its military to Ukraine. But what if NATO decides to stop playing the proxy game and directly entering the war on behalf of Ukraine? In other words, I'm talking about a full-blown war between Russia and NATO. Who will prove to be the underdog and who will emerge victorious? And then there are so many other underlying questions to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. What is NATO? What is this organization all about? And what is its aim? Why does Russia hate NATO? And why Vladimir Putin and Russia are interested in Ukraine so much in the first place? Well, NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Founded in 1949 in the aftermath of the Korean War, NATO calls itself the Intergovernmental Military Organization. Currently, it has 30 members, out of which 28 are European countries and 2 are North American countries. Some of its important founding members include the United States, Great Britain, France, Italy, and Belgium. On this note, let us first take a look at head-to-head comparison between NATO and Russia. Remember, I had told just moments ago that NATO currently has 30 members. Each of these members have to contribute military personnel and substantial financial budget to NATO every year. In 2021 itself, the US stationed 1.35 million American troops for NATO and contributed millions of dollars to NATO's budget every year. Likewise, Great Britain, France, Germany, Turkey and all other members make their own due contributions every single year. Now, we all know that Russia is a great military power. Russia was on the winning side both in the World War I and World War II. It played a very critical role in defeating the Nazi Germany during the World War II. But despite all its military might and great history, can Russia alone militarily compete with an organization that is represented by 30 odd countries? Well, conventionally speaking, odds are clearly stuck against Russia. In other words, Vladimir Putin's country does not have a level playing field to speak of. And it is clearly visible in the numbers and statistics that I'll be sharing with you right now. I'd like to inform my viewers that I sourced these statistics and numbers from credible websites and sources. So you can trust the number that I'm sharing with you. Let us start with military personnel. Well, NATO's military personnel currently exceeds 5.4 million, which is 4 times more than that of Russia. Russia currently has just 1.3 million military personnel. The disparity between Russia and NATO gets more stronger when comparisons come to devices and equipment. Let us start with Air Force. Now, NATO currently has 21,000 aircraft, whereas Russia has only 4,000 aircraft. Going further, NATO has more than 1,000 ground attack aircraft and 678 tanker aircraft, while Russia has 739 and 20 respectively. If NATO defeats Russia hands down in air, then the scenario is no different when it comes to sea. This is where Russia and NATO are placed when it comes to naval force. NATO has over 2,000 military ships, while Red Army has barely 600 military ships. Now when it comes to aircraft carriers, NATO has 17, while Russia has only 1. As for the submarines are concerned, NATO has 144 submarines, while Russia has just 70. Now finally, let's talk about the nuclear warheads. Nuclear warheads is probably the only area where Russia is ahead of the NATO allies, though very marginally. NATO has roughly 6,000 odd nuclear warheads, while Russia on the other hand has a little over 6,200 nuclear warheads. To make long story short, NATO beats Russia hands down when it comes to military comparison. And based on these hard numbers alone, we can easily conclude that NATO will probably and most likely emerge victorious if it decides to enter the Russian-Ukraine war tomorrow. Now what's the purpose of NATO? Why Russia and Putin hate NATO, and why is Russia so much interested in Ukraine in the first place? To better understand the historical tension between Russia and NATO, we will have to rewind back to the year 1945, the year when the Second World War ended. With the end of the Second World War, two big powerhouses emerged. One was the United States and the other was Russia, which back then was known as Soviet Union or USSR. Now both these powerhouses represented contrasting ideologies. US represented the ideology of free market capitalism, and Soviet Union on the other hand represented communist ideology. These two powerhouses competed with each other to decide who will eventually become the superpower of the world. But mind you, Soviet Union and America never had a direct military confrontation. Instead, they fought what came to be known as Cold War, where both countries got involved in sort of a competition and tried to outdo each other in almost all the areas. Be it foreign diplomacy, military strength, economy, space, and even sports. In the beginning of the Cold War, it seemed that Soviet Union pretty much had an upper hand. This was mostly thanks to its enormously large territorial size, and even before the end of the Second World War, Russia had taken control of much of the Eastern Europe. Russia eventually converted these Eastern European countries into a single confederation, and this confederation eventually came to be known as the Soviet Union. Now, which were these Eastern European countries? Now, America felt increasingly threatened by Soviet Union's growing territorial size across the European continent, and America felt an urgent necessity to control Soviet Union's territorial ambitions across Europe. Out of this desperate necessity emerged NATO. NATO was formed in 1949. But why 1949? Well, actually 1949 was the year when Soviet Union conducted its first ever nuclear test.
That there has been an atomic explosion in the Soviet Union.
This finally proved to be the triggering point for the US and Western allies to form NATO. The main purpose of NATO was to combat Russia's territorial expansion not only in Europe but also across the world. Additionally, NATO was also formed with the aim of protecting and promoting the interests of the Western allies across the globe. Now, NATO has one very important underlying principle. According to this principle, if any country attacks one NATO member, then it will be considered as a direct attack on all the members of NATO. So this basically means that if tomorrow Russia suddenly attacks an important NATO member like France, then all other NATO members will come to France's rescue and fight a united war against Russia. To sum it up, NATO follows the old age philosophy that united we stand and divided we fall. When it was created in 1949, NATO had total 12 founding members. But as the time passed by, it enrolled other European countries in its club. NATO basically follows an open door policy, which means that any European country can apply for its membership provided all other NATO members agree to the membership of a new member. In the 60s and 70s, the Cold War had reached the peak with both the US and Soviet Union leaving no stone unturned to prove their global supremacy. But in 1991, Soviet Union collapsed and disintegrated, and with this ended the decade-long Cold War. Following the disintegration of USSR, most of the Eastern European countries that were once part of the mighty Soviet Union became fully independent countries. Now, Soviet's disintegration also meant that the United States of America finally became the sole superpower of the world. But what happened to NATO? Well, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the very purpose of NATO had all but finished. And hence, technically, the organization should have got dissolved in 1991 itself. But this obviously did not happen. Not only did NATO remain fully intact, but steadily it started enrolling more European countries into the club. In fact, in 2004, NATO enrolled 7 Eastern European countries in its club. Out of these 7 members, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania were the members of the former Soviet Union. On the other hand, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia and Slovenia also became a member of the NATO, while these countries were among those where Soviet Union had a lot of influence during the Cold War era. Russia, of course, did not like this. Now, Russia saw this as a NATO and America's direct encroachment in its traditional Eastern European region. Now, since the formation of Soviet Union in 1922, Russia always saw these small European countries as a buffer state. What is a buffer state, by the way? It simply means that if tomorrow any major power threatens to attack Russia, then it will use military and other resources of these small countries to its advantage and protect itself against the military invasion. But with the US and NATO now setting foot on its backyard, Russia certainly got a little jittery. But back in 2004, Russia did not make much fuss and more or less kept quiet. However, the same Russia became very aggressive and assertive when its another former Soviet member, Ukraine, started expressing interest in becoming NATO's member.
Вже пройшли свій шлях в НАТО.
For all those who don't know, Ukraine had become part of Soviet Union way back in 1922. Now, Ukraine expressed the interest of joining NATO for the first time in 2005. Since then, Russia's President Vladimir Putin has been repeatedly warning Ukraine of staying away from NATO. In fact, at one point, Putin wanted a written guarantee from the US that it will not include Ukraine in NATO. America obviously refused to give this guarantee. But the question is, why is Russia so sensitive about Ukraine? What is it about Ukraine that Russia does not want it to be part of NATO? The thing is that Ukraine is one of the 12 countries with whom Russia shares a direct boundary. Now, hence, a NATO membership for Ukraine would obviously pose a direct military threat to Russia, simply because it will make way for Western countries, including its arch rival America, to land its army and military directly at the doorstep of Russia. Besides, once Ukraine becomes part of NATO, Russia will completely lose military and political clout on one of its important neighboring countries. Another very important factor is the fact that even today, Russia continues to see NATO as a symbol of America's hegemony. Even though NATO currently has 30 members, it is the US that gives the maximum financial and military assistance to the NATO. According to a rough estimate, America alone contributes more than 50% to NATO's annual budget each year. Therefore, Russia is not entirely wrong in seeing NATO as an extension of America's supremacy. And Russia obviously does not want its neighboring country, Ukraine, to become part of this American hegemony. And as I said earlier, even today, Russia considers America its biggest arch rival. This despite the fact that the Cold War ended way back in 1991. To make long story short, nothing probably frightens Russia more than seeing its arch rival America right across its border. And let us now talk about NATO's continuous attempt to try and act as a global police force. Now, on paper, NATO has always claimed that it is a peaceful and defensive organization, implying that it will use the military only as a last resort, and that too when any of its member nation comes directly under attack. But well, this sounds good on paper, but in reality, this organization has a pretty dubious record when it comes to invading and conducting military operations against other countries. One such blatant military intervention happened in 1999 when NATO conducted airstrikes against Yugoslavia during the Kosovo War. This month-long airstrikes ended up killing nearly 2,000 people, including 800 Yugoslavian soldiers. NATO also conducted military and peacekeeping operations during the Gulf War in 1990, Afghanistan War in 2003, and Iraq War in 2007-11. What's even more shocking is that in the past, there have been instances where NATO has even overruled UN resolutions and conducted military operations against other countries. In other words, NATO does not even respect the United Nations, which again I would like to repeat is pretty shocking. Now, such arbitrary and dictatorial actions have given NATO an image of a dictatorial police force that has been used by the Western countries to promote their vested interests and suppress the weaker nations. And this fact is again one of the many reasons why Russia and Putin hate NATO so much. Now, I would like to come to the last part of the video where I'll talk about another interesting factor why Russia is so sensitive about Ukraine. Now, geopolitics and military threats are not the only reasons why Russia is so anti against Ukraine joining the NATO. There is another very interesting reason, and this reason has to do with Ukraine's rich oil and energy reserves. Now, this small Eastern European country is supposedly home to enormous amount of oil and gas reserves. In fact, Ukraine supposedly has the second largest reserves of natural gas in the entire European continent. Although Ukraine's gas reserves are still largely untapped and unexplored, this country is still a golden goose. A golden goose that Russia does not want to let go from its hand. More so because Russia itself is one of the largest exporters of oil and energy in the entire world. Oil and energy export accounts of nearly 30% of Russia's annual GDP. And the more oil and energy reserves Russia has at its disposal, it can confidently assure the future economic prosperity of all its citizens. And this partially explains why Russia attaches so much importance to Ukraine. Only the coming time will tell us whether the Russia-Ukraine war will lead to a full-blown war between Russia and NATO. If this war does take place, then Russia will certainly find itself on a weak footing. But one sincerely hopes that sanity prevails and the war is avoided at all costs. More so because Russia is a nuclear power and the nuclear war is the last thing we want. And in case nuclear war really blows out, then you should know how to protect yourself during that nuclear fallout. And if you want to know that, we have made a special video as to how to survive a nuclear war and how will you be able to live through that. Check that out in the I button. And that was it for this video. If you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. This is Prashant signing off. See you in the next one.